Hey crew, it's Pitt and I am back with some more philosophy. Today we are diving back into the works of Mr. Georg Hegel. This is The Science of Logic. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the science of logic with part 2 of being in itself, or for itself. Alright, so C, repulsion and attraction. A, exclusion of the one. The many ones are each a being. Their existence or their reference to one another is a non-reference. It is external to them, the abstract void. But they themselves are now this negative reference to themselves as to existent others. The demonstrated contradiction, the infinity posited in the immediacy of being. With this, repulsion now finds immediately before it that which is repelled by it. In this determination, it is an excluding. The one repels from itself only the many not generated by it, the ones not posited by it. This repelling is mutual from all sides, relative, limited by the being of the ones. Plurality is not at first posited otherness. Limit is only the void, only that in which the ones are not. But in the limit they also are. They are in the void, or their repulsion is their common connecting reference. This mutual repulsion is the posited existence of the many ones. It is not their being for itself, in accordance with which they would be distinguished as many only in a third, but is rather their own distinguishing which preserves them. They mutually negate themselves, posit one another as being only for one. But at the same time they negate this being only for one just as much. They repel the ideality that they have and are. So, the moments which in ideality are absolutely united come apart. In its being for itself, the one is also for one. But this one, for which it is itself. Its distinguishing from itself is immediately sublated. But in the plurality of the distinguished one has a being. The being for one, as has been determined in exclusion, is therefore a being for other. Each, thus, comes to be repelled by an other, is sublated and made into a one which is not for itself but for one, and an other one at that. The being for itself of the many ones thus shows itself to be their self-preservation through the mediation of their mutual repulsion, in which they sublated themselves reciprocally and posit the others as mere being for another. But the self-preservation consists at the same time in repelling this ideality and positing the ones as not being for another. This self-preservation of the ones through their negative reference to one other is, however, rather their dissolution. The ones not only are, but maintain themselves through their reciprocal exclusion. First, it is in their being, and indeed their being in itself, as contrasted with their reference to the other, that they should now have a firm point of support for their diversity as against their being negated. This, in itselfness, rests on their being ones. But they are all this. In their being in itself, instead of having their firm point of support for their diversity, they are all the same. Second, their existence and their way of relating to one another, that is, their positing themselves as one, is their reciprocal negating. This, however, is likewise one and the same determination of all, through which they therefore posit themselves as identical. Just as, by being in themselves the same, The ideality that should be posited in them through others is their own, and they thus repel just as little. According to their being and positing, they are, consequently, only one affirmative unity. This consideration regarding the ones that from either side of their determination, whether they are or refer to one, or whether they just are or refer to one another, they show themselves to be only one and the same, indistinguishable, and is a comparison that belongs to us. Also, to be seen, therefore, is what is posited in them in their mutual self-reference itself. They are. This much is presupposed in this reference, and they are only inasmuch as they negate themselves reciprocally, and at the same time keep away this ideality. Their being negated from themselves, that is, they negate the reciprocal negating, but they are only inasmuch as they negate, and so, since their reciprocal negating is negated, their being is negated. To be sure, since they are, nothing would be negated through this negating, which for them is only something external. This negating of the other rebounds off of them, coming their way only by striking their surface, and yet they turn back upon themselves only by negating the others. They are only as this mediation. This turning back of theirs is self-preservation, and their being for itself. Since their negating is ineffectual because of the resistance offered by the others, whether as existence or as negating, they do not turn back to themselves, do not preserve themselves, and so are not. It was previously remarked that the ones themselves are each a one like any other. This is not just a matter of our connecting them by way of reference, of bringing them together externally. Repulsion is itself a referring. The one that excludes the ones refers itself to them, to the ones, that is, to itself. The negative relating of the ones to one another is consequently only a coming together with oneself. This identity in which their repelling crosses over is sublation of their diversity and externality, which they should have rather asserted with respect to each other by excluding each other. This self-positing in a one of the many ones is attraction. So, at first, the repulsion is the differentiation, right? Me and you are both humans. I am differentiated from you, and so by our differentiation, we are repulsed from each other into individuals. But by our similarities, we are attracted to each other as human beings. So together, we are one as humans, but separately, we are one as ourselves. That's basically what's being talked about here. Remark. Driven to the extreme of the one as being for itself, self-subsistence is an abstract, formal self-subsistence that destroys itself. It is the ultimate, most stubborn error, one which takes itself as the ultimate truth, whether it assumes the more concrete form of abstract freedom, of pure I, and further still of evil. It is the freedom which so misconceives itself as to place its essence in this abstraction, and, in thus shutting itself up within itself, flatters itself that it attains itself in all purity. This self-subsistence, to determine it further, is the error of considering its own essence negatively, and of relating itself to it negatively. It is thus a negative relating to itself, which, while wanting to gain its own being, destroys it. And this, his doing, is only the manifestation of the nullity of the doing. Reconciliation is the recognition that towards which the negative relating is directed is rather its essence. And this is only in the desisting from the negativity, its being for itself, rather than holding fast to it. This is like one way of looking at this is like you talking bad about yourself. And by doing so, you're destroying your ego, which is your thought of yourself. When you say that I'm stupid, you're reinforcing to yourself that you don't have the capacity to do something, and so therefore you are negatively destroying yourself. It is an ancient proposition that the one is many, and especially that the many is one. It should again be observed in this connection that, as expressed in propositions, the truth of the one and the many appears in inadequate form. Such a truth is to be grasped and expressed only as a becoming, as a process, a repulsion and attraction, not as being, in the way the latter is posited in proposition as inert unity. Earlier mention was made recalling Plato's dialectic in the Parmenides on the derivation of the many from the one, specifically from the proposition, the one is. It is the internal dialectic of the concept that has been expounded. It is easiest to grasp the dialectic of the proposition that the many is one, as external reflection, and inasmuch as the subject matter also, the many, is a mutual externality. Reflection may indeed be external here. This comparison of the many with one another immediately shows that each is absolutely determined just as any other. Each is a one. Each a one of many. Each is by excluding the others, so that they are absolutely the same. Absolutely one determination is present. This is a matter of fact, and all that needs to be done is simply to grasp the fact. If in stubbornness the understanding refuses to do it, it is only because it also has distinction in mind, and rightly so. But distinction is not left out because of that fact, as surely as the fact is no less there despite distinction. One could, as it were, reassure the understanding concerning this simple grasp of the fact of unity, that distinction will also come in again. B. The one of attraction. Repulsion is the fragmentation of the one, first into the many of which it is the negative relating, since they presuppose each other as existent. Right? So that is me repulsing you into separate quantities, right? Maybe it's melanin, maybe it's genitalia, maybe it's hair length, maybe it's hair color, maybe it's eyes. However you distinguish yourself from someone else, it is the fragmentation of the one humanity first into the many, which is the negative relating. You don't have the same attributes that I do. We're relating negatively. It doesn't mean that we're arguing. And they presuppose each other as existent. So I see you as different from me, and so we both exist. It is the ought of ideality. This ideality will, however, be realized in attraction. Repulsion passes over into attraction, the many ones into the one. Both, repulsion and attraction, are at first distinguished from each other. Repulsion as the reality of the ones, attraction as their posited ideality. Attraction refers to repulsion by having it for a presupposition. Repulsion delivers the material for attraction. If there were no ones, there would be nothing to attract. The representation of continuing attraction, of the consumption of the ones, presupposes an equally continuing generation of the ones. The sense representation of spatial attraction gives continuity to the flow of ones to be attracted, to replace the atoms that vanish at the point of attraction. Another multitude comes forth from the void, infinitely, if one so wishes. If attraction were represented as accomplished, that is, the many as brought to the point of the one, the result would be just an inert one, no longer any attraction. The ideality immediately present in attraction still also has in it the determination of the negation itself, the many ones to which it refers. Attraction is inseparable from repulsion. To attract pertains at first in equal measure to each of the many ones as immediately present. None has the advantage over another. What would result then is an equilibrium in the attraction, or more precisely, an equilibrium in the attraction and the repulsion themselves, and an inert state of rest without any ideality present there. But there can be no question here of any such immediately present one taking precedence over another, for this would presuppose a determinate distinction between them. Attraction is rather the positing of the given lack of distinction among the ones. Attraction is itself the positing in the first place of one distinct from other ones. These are only the immediate ones that are to preserve themselves through repulsion, through their posited negation. However, what precedes is the one of attraction, which is therefore determined as the mediated one, the one posited as one. The first ones, as immediate, do not in their ideality return into themselves, but have this ideality each in another. The one is, however, ideality that has been realized, posited in the one. It attracts through the mediation of repulsion. It contains in itself this mediation as its determination. It does not swallow the attracted ones within it as into one point. That is, it does not sublate them abstractly. Since it contains repulsion in its determination, the latter equally preserves the ones as many within it. By its attracting, it musters, so to speak, something before it, gains an area or filling. Thus, there is in the unity of repulsion and attraction in general. So this is like drawing together groups of people, right? Whether it is the sexual genitalia or the melanin levels, it is finding the attraction of the similarities without the differentiation being as big of a problem. When you start differentiating, okay, well, we share the same genitalia and the same melanin levels, we have the same everything except for these few things, then there is still repulsion within the group that is being attracted. C. The connection of repulsion and attraction. The difference of the one and the many has determined itself as a difference of their mutual reference connecting them, which breaks down into two, repulsion and attraction, each of which stands at first outside the other on its own, in such a way that the two are essentially joined together. Nevertheless, their still indeterminate unity must be brought out in greater detail. As the fundamental determination of the one, repulsion appears first, and it appears as immediate, like the ones which are indeed generated by it, and yet are, at the same time, posited as immediate. And it is therefore indifferent to the attraction which is added to it externally and thus presupposed. Rather, attraction is not presupposed by repulsion. It is not supposed to have any part of the positing, and in the being of the latter, that is, as if repulsion were not already in it, the negation of itself, or the ones, were not already negated in it. In this way, we have repulsion in abstraction by itself, and attraction, likewise, holds out to the ones, as each an existent, the side of an immediate existence which comes to them by itself as an other. If we take mere repulsion in this way, for itself, it is then the dispersion of the many ones in indeterminacy, outside the sphere of repulsion itself. For repulsion is the negating of the connection of the many to one another. Lack of connection is their determination when abstractly taken. But repulsion is not just the void. The ones, although unconnected, do not repel what constitutes their determination, do not exclude it. Although negative, repulsion is nonetheless essentially connection. The mutual repulsion and flight is not a liberation from what is repelled and fled from, but that which is excluded still stands in connection with what is excluded from it. But this moment of connection is attraction, which is thus within repulsion itself. It is the negating of that abstract repulsion by which ones would each be inexistent, referring only to itself without mutual exclusion. But in starting with repulsion of the ones as immediately present there, and with attraction consequently also posited as intruding on them externally, the two repulsion and attraction, are held apart as diverse determinations despite their inseparability. But it has been established that it is not just repulsion which is presupposed by attraction, but that there equally is present also a reverse connection of repulsion to attraction, and that repulsion, no less, has attraction for its presupposition. As thus determined, they are inseparable, and at the same time each is determined as an ought and a limitation with respect to the other. Their ought is the abstract determinateness as each, and existent in itself. A determinateness, however, which is thereby directed beyond itself and refers to the other. And so, through the mediation of the other, each is as other. Their self-subsistence consists in their being mutually posited in this mediation as an other determining. Thus, repulsion is the positing of the many, attraction the positing of the one. The latter is equally the negation of the many, and the former the negation of the ideality of such a many in the one. So that attraction, too, is attraction only through the mediation of repulsion, just as repulsion is repulsion through the mediation of attraction. In all this, however, the mediation of each with itself through the other is in fact negated. Each of the two determinations is its own self-mediation. This will result from a closer examination of the two determinations and will bring us back to the unity of their concept. In the first place, that each presupposes itself, that in its presupposition each refers only to itself. This is already present in the way the still relative repulsion and attraction behave at first. Relative repulsion is the mutual repulsion of many ones which are already at hand, supposedly immediately given. But that there be many ones, this is repulsion itself. Any presupposition that it would have is only its own positing. Moreover, the determination of the being that would accrue to the ones apart from their being posited, whereby they would already be, belongs likewise to repulsion. Repelling is that through which the ones manifest themselves and maintain themselves as one, through which they are as such. Their being is their repulsion itself, which is thus not some relative existence against another, but relates itself throughout only to itself. Attraction is the positing of the one as such, of the real one, with respect to which the existence of the many is determined as only a vanishing idealization. Attraction thus directly presupposes itself. It presupposes itself in the determination, namely, of the many ones to be an idealization, the same ones which are otherwise supposed to have existence for themselves and to repel others, including, therefore, any other that attracts. Against this determination of repulsion, the ones do not attain ideality only through the relation to attraction. On the contrary, the ideality is presupposed. It is the ideality of the ones as an existent in itself, inasmuch as they, as ones, including the one conceived as attracting, are not distinguished from one another, but are one and the same. So what it is saying, basically, is that you consider yourself the idealization of human, right? And so you are looking for other humans who have the same traits. Now, hopefully that is not as arbitrary as, melanin. It can be thought patterns and the ability to conceptually logic your way through things. You can be looking for these traits in others, but you see yourself as the idealization of it. And so you are repulsing those things which are opposite of it and attracting those things which are equal to it. So you are trying to pull to you in identity things by which you already hold within yourself as idealizations. So I believe in truth, justice, and freedom, right? I am looking for other people who believe in truth, justice, and freedom, hopefully in the same way that I do. My idealization of myself is that I have the perfect understanding of truth, justice, and freedom, and everybody else is merely trying. And so I am repulsing those who are against the things that I believe, and I am attracting those who are the same as what I believe. And that is basically what is being talked about here. This presupposing of the two determinations, each for itself, implies further that each contains within itself the other as a moment. Self-presupposing, in general, is the positing of oneself in a one as the negative of oneself, repulsion. And what is presupposed in this positing is the same as that which presupposes attraction. That each is in itself only a moment, this is the transition of each from itself into the other, the negation of itself in the other, and the positing of itself as the other of itself. The one, as such, is thus a coming out of itself, it itself only the positing of itself as its other, as the many. And the many, for its part, is only the falling back upon itself and the positing of itself as its other, as a one, and is in this equally only the connecting of itself to itself, each continuing itself in its other. Therefore, the coming out of itself, repulsion, and the positing as one, attraction, are already inherently present as undivided. But in the repulsion and attraction, which are relative, that is, which presuppose immediate, determinedly existent ones, it is posited that the two are each within it this negation of itself, and consequently also the continuity of itself in its other. The repulsion of the determinedly existent ones is the self-preservation of the one through the mutual holding off of the others, so that, 1, the others are negated in it. This is the side of its existence, or of its being, for another, and is therefore attraction as the ideality of the ones. And, 2, the one is in itself, without reference to the others. However, not only has the in itself in general long since passed over into being for itself, the one in itself, according to its determination, is the coming to be of many. The attraction of the existent ones is their ideality and the positing of the one. And in this, as both the negating and the producing of the one, attraction sublates itself, and as a positing within it of the one, it is the negative of itself. It is a repulsion. With this, the development of being for itself is completed and has attained its result. In connecting itself to itself infinitely, that is, as the positive negation of negation, the one is the mediation by which it repels itself as its absolute, that is, abstract, otherness, the many, from itself, and in thus negatively connecting itself to this, its non-being, it sublates it, and is in it precisely only the connection to itself. The one is only this becoming in which the determination, it begins. That is, it's being posited as an immediate existent, and equally that. As a result, it has restored itself as the one. That is, the equally immediate and exclusive one have vanished. The process which it is, posits and contains it from all sides only as something sublated. The sublation, determined at first only as a relative sublating of the connection to another existent, a connection which is therefore itself not an indifferent repulsion and attraction, equally proves itself to pass over into the infinite connection of mediation through the negation of the external connection of immediate and determinate existence, and to have for result precisely that becoming which, in the instability of its moments, is the collapse, or rather, the going together with itself into simple immediacy. This being, according to the determination which it has now acquired, is quantity. If we briefly review the moments of this transition of quality into quantity, we find that the qualitative has being and immediacy for its fundamental determination, and the limit and the determinateness are, in this immediacy, so identical with the being of something that the something itself vanishes along with its alteration. As thus posited, it is determined as finite. Because of the immediacy of this unit, in which the distinction has disappeared, although it is implicitly present in the unity of being and nothing, the distinction falls outside that unity as otherness in general. This reference to the other contradicts the immediacy in which qualitative determinateness is self-reference. The otherness is sublated in the infinity for the being for itself, the being for itself that has realized the distinction implicitly present in it in the negation of negation, has realized it as the one and the many, and as their connecting references, and has also elevated the qualitative to true unity. That is, a unity which is no longer immediate, but posited as accordant with itself. This unity is, therefore, being, only as affirmative, that is, immediacy, self-premeditated through the negation of negation. Being is posited as a unity, permeating its determinacies, limits, etc., which are posited in it as sublated. Existence. In this determination, it is negation, or determinateness, as moment of the affirmative being. Yet, this determinateness is no longer immediate, but reflected into itself, refers not to another, but to itself. Absolutely determined being. Absolute in itselfness. The one. Otherness, as such, is itself being for itself. Being for itself, as that being which persists across the determinateness, and in which the one and even the being determined in itself are posited as sublated. The one is simultaneously determined as having gone beyond itself and as unity. The one, the absolutely determined limit, is consequently posited as a limit which is none. A limit which is in being, but is indifferent to it. Remark. Attraction and repulsion, as is well known, are usually regarded as forces. We must now compare this determination of them, and the relations connected with it, with the way we have just conceived them. Regarded as forces, they are treated as self-standing, and therefore not as referring to each other by nature. That is, not as each only a moment that should pass over into its opposite, but as each persisting instead in opposition to the other. They are represented, moreover, as joining in a third in matter, in such a way, however, that this unification does not count as their truth, but each counts rather as a first, as an existent in and for itself. It is matter, or the determinations of matter, which are rather posited and produced through them. When it is said that matter has these two forces in itself, this unity which they have in matter is understood as an association within which they are at the same time presupposed to remain independent existence, free of each other. Kant famously constructed matter from the forces of repulsion and attraction, or, at least, as he put it himself, displayed the metaphysical element of such a construction. It will not be without interest to examine this construction more closely. This metaphysical exposition of a subject matter which, not only itself, but in its determinations, seemed to belong to experience, is remarkable in part because, as a conceptual experiment, It gave at least the impetus for the modern philosophy of nature. A philosophy which does not make nature the foundation of science as something given to perception through the senses, but discerns its determinations in the absolute concept. In part, also, because that Kantian construction is still deeply entrenched and held as a philosophical beginning and the foundation of physics. Now, it is true that as it exists for the senses, matter is not a subject of logic, no more than space and spatial determinations are. Nevertheless, the forces of attraction and repulsion, when regarded as forces of sensuous matter, also have for a foundation the pure determinations of the one and the many, here considered, and their reciprocal connections, to which I have given the names of repulsion and attraction, because these were the most readily available. On closer inspection, Kant's procedure in the deduction of matter from these forces, which he calls a construction, does not deserve this name, unless any kind of reflection, even analytical reflection, be called a construction. And to be sure, subsequent philosophers of nature have employed the name constructing for even the shallowest ratiocination and the most baseless concoction of unbridled imagination and thoughtless reflection. And these so-called factors of attraction and repulsion have especially been used as favorites everywhere. I absolutely love the shade being thrown in this paragraph, right? To be sure, subsequent philosophers of nature have employed the name constructing even for the shallowest ratiocination and the most baseless concoction of unbridled imagination and thoughtless reflection. That is excellent. That is master level trolling right there. If he would have dropped a name, it would have been a little bit better, but it's good even without the name. I don't know who he's talking about, but he was definitely throwing shade, and I'm here for it. For Kant's procedure is, at bottom, analytical, not constructive. It presupposes the representation of matter and then asks which forces belong to it in order to obtain its presupposed determinations. Thus, on the one hand, he demands the force of attraction because through repulsion alone, without attraction, no matter could exist. In fact, that is true, right? We'll hit it real quick, but if you're unaware, that is how the atom works. I don't remember what date this is, but I'm pretty sure this was in the 1800s, before we had the electron microscope and a full understanding of what the elements were, much like with Miss Blavatsky. And so we do indeed have this demonstrated in an atom, right? The element. Take a hydrogen or a helium. Helium's easy. It's 1, 1, and 1. One positive, one negative, one neutral, right? The positive and the neutral group together in the center. The negative attracts the electron. The positive repulses the electron. And so the space that is held between the nucleus of the atom and the electron which encircles it is both attraction and repulsion. And so it does fit. And that was pure speculation upon the point of Kant. Quite impressed. Back to the text. On the other hand, he equally derives repulsion from matter and gives as the reason for it that we represent matter as impenetrable, since it is in this determination that matter presents itself to the sense of touch, through which it reveals itself to us. Now, that is not correct, right? The density of matter is a relative thing. The only difference between air and liquid is our determination of it, right? It is both something through which you can pass, you can consume, you can move. Like, it's a little bit harder through a denser gas, which we call liquid, or it's a little bit easier in a less dense liquid that we call gas. It is the same for solids. They are more dense relatively than a liquid, but that doesn't mean that they are composed of entirely different concepts, right? The carbon that makes up the solid parts of you is the same as the oxygen that makes up the less solid parts of you, right? But solidity is relative. You seem to be solid, but something that is more solid can pass right through you, and therefore you are not solid. That is true for everything, up to the elements. We have indeed split one of the elements. And so we have the ability to Understand that even though it appears solid, it's not necessarily solid. Every single molecule inside of this phone is vibrating in relation to each other, and they are held in differentiation from me by attraction and repulsion. Back to the text. Consequently, he proceeds, repulsion is directly thought of in the concept of matter, for it is immediately given together with it. Attraction, by contrast, is added to it by way of inferences. These inferences, however, also rest on what has just been said, namely, that as a matter that had merely repulsive force would not exhaust what we mean by matter. This is, as is lucidly clear, the procedure of a cognition that reflects upon experience, begins by perceiving determinations in appearance, then lays them down as foundation, and, for a so-called explanation of them, assumes corresponding basic elements or forces that supposedly produce these determinations of appearance. Wait. I'm sorry. A little too much cayenne in that one, sorry. As regards this distinction just mentioned in the way cognition finds repulsion and attraction in matter, Kant further observes that the force of attraction does not any the less belong to the concept of matter, although it is not contained in it. Kant stresses these last words, but it is difficult to see just where the distinction would lie, for a determination that belongs to the concept of a fact must in truth be contained in it. What causes the difficulty and gives rise to this hollow subterfuge is that from the start, Kant one-sidedly attributes to the concept of matter only the determination of impenetrability, which we are supposed to perceive by touch. For which reason the force of repulsion, as the holding off of another from oneself, is said to be given immediately. But then, if it is further said that matter cannot be there without the force of attraction, this claim is based on representation of matter drawn from perception. The determination of attraction must, therefore, also be met with in perception, and one can well perceive that, besides its being for itself, which sublates the being for other, yields resistance, matter also possesses the existence connection with itself. It possesses spatial extension and cohesion, and a very stable cohesion indeed in rigidity and solidity. Physics explains that for the tearing apart, etc., of a body there is required a force which is stronger than the reciprocal attraction of the body's parts. From this observation it is possible for reflection to infer attraction, or to assume it as a given, just as immediately as it did for repulsion. In fact, if we examine Kant's inferences on the basis of which the force of attraction is to be derived, the demonstration of the proposition that the possibility of matter requires a force of attraction as the second fundamental force, we find that they contain nothing except that through mere repulsion, matter would not be spatial. In presupposing that matter fills space, one attributes to it the continuity for which the force of attraction is assumed to be the base. Now, even if such a so-called construction of matter had at the most analytical merit, however diminished because of flawed exposition, the thought on which it is based, namely, that matter must be made out to be from these two opposing determinations as its fundamental forces, must always be highly esteemed. Kant is primarily concerned to banish the ordinary mechanistic ways of representation that stop at the one determination of impenetrability, of existence that subsist point-like for themselves, and reduce to something external the opposite determination. The internal connection of matter, or of a plurality of matters, that are in turn regarded as particular ones. These are ways of representation, as Kant says, that would not make room for any other motive force except pressure and thrust. That is, except through influence from the outside. This externality of cognition presupposes motion as always already externally present in matter. It does not occur to thought to grasp it as something internal, to conceive it as itself in matter, which, for precisely that reason, is assumed to be motionless and inert. This standpoint has in view only ordinary mechanics, not immanent and free motion. While it is true that Kant sublates that externality by making attraction a force of matter itself, the attraction, which is the reciprocal connections of matter, inasmuch as these are assumed to be external to each other, or the connection of matter in general in its self-external being, still, within matter, his two fundamental forces remain external, independent of each other. As null as is the independence attributed to these two forces from the standpoint of the said cognition, just as null must any other would-be fixed distinction made regarding their content show itself to be. For such forces, when seen as they truly are in the way we have just done, are only moments that pass over into each other. I shall now consider these other distinctions as Kant gives them. Thus, he defines the force of attraction as a penetrative force, in virtue of which a matter can act on the parts of others, even beyond the surface of contact. The force of repulsion, on the contrary, as a surface force by which matters can act on each other only in the shared surface of contact. The reason given for supposing that this latter force is only a surface one is as follows. The parts in contact each limit the sphere of action of another, and the force of repulsion cannot move any more distant parts except through the mediation of intervening parts. An immediate action of one matter upon another across these intervening parts of forces of expansion, this means here forces of repulsion, is impossible. But the immediate comment here is that in assuming nearer, or more distant, parts of matter, the same distinction arises with respect to attraction. Namely, granted that the first atom acts upon a second, this second atom would find itself between that first atom and a more distant third atom, and this third atom would then most directly fall within the sphere of attraction of the second atom, lying closest to it between it and the first. The first atom would not therefore exercise an immediate simple action upon the third. It follows that the action of attraction would be just as mediated as that of repulsion. Further, the true penetration of the force of attraction would have to consist only in this, that every part of matter is attractive in and for itself, not that a certain number of them behaves passively and only one atom actively. But, more to the point, with respect to the force of repulsion itself, it must be observed that, in the cited passage, the parts are in contact with each other, presumably in the state of compactness and continuity of a ready matter, which would not allow repulsion across itself. However, such a compactness in matter, in which the parts are in contact with each other, no longer separated by the void, already presupposes that the force of repulsion has been sublated. In keeping with the sensuous representation of repulsion dominant here, we have to assume parts which, being in contact with each other, do not repel each other. It therefore follows, quite tautologically, that repulsion cannot have a place where its non-presence is being assumed. But there is nothing to be gained from this for a determination of the forces of attraction. However, if we reflect on what transpires, namely, that parts in contact with each other touch each other to the extent that they are still hold themselves apart, the implication is that the force of repulsion is not just on the surface of matter, but within the sphere that was supposed to be only a sphere of attraction. Kant further assumes that through attraction matter only occupies a space without filling it, and Since matter does not fill space through the force of attraction, the latter can act across empty space, for there is no intervening matter to set limits to it. This distinction is of much the same nature as the one mentioned above, where determination is supposed to belong to a subject without, however, being contained in it. Here, matter is supposed only to occupy a space, but not fill it. So there we have repulsion, if we stay at its first definition, according to which the ones repel each other, and only negatively, which means here, through empty space, connect with each other. Here we have the force of attraction that instead keeps space empty. It does not fill space by connecting the atoms, that is, it keeps the atoms in reciprocal negative connection. We see that here Kant unconsciously runs into what is implied by the nature of the fact. He ascribes to the force of attraction precisely what in the first definition he ascribed to the opposite force. While he was busy firming up the distinction between the two forces, what happened is that the one force crossed over into the other. So for Kant, matter is supposed to fill space through repulsion, and through it, empty space, which allows for attractive force, is consequently supposed to vanish. In fact, in sublating empty space, repulsion sublates the negative connection of the atoms, or the ones, that is, their repulsion. That is, repulsion is determined as the opposite of itself. Added to this blurring of distinctions, there is the further confusion that, as we remarked in the beginning, Kant's presentation of the opposing forces is analytical. Matter, which should first be derived from its elements, recurs through the whole exposition already set and constituted. The two forces, surface and penetrative, are assumed by definition to be the motive forces by virtue of which matters can be supposed to act in one way or the other. They are conceived here, therefore, not as forces through which matter would come to be in the first place, but as forces through which matter, already in place, would only be moved. But insofar as we are speaking of forces through which different matters act upon one another and are in motion, this is quite another thing than the determination and the connection that such forces should have as moments of matter. When further determined as centripetal and centrifugal, these forces generate the same opposition as they do as attractive and repulsive forces. They seem to harbor an essential distinction, since in their sphere there is a one that stays fixed, a center, and with respect to it the other ones do not behave as for themselves. The distinction between the two forces can therefore be linked to this presupposed distinction between a single one at the center and the other ones that do not stay fixed relatively to it. But now, insofar as such forces are used for explanatory purposes, in which function they are taken, as are also the forces of attraction and repulsion in inverse quantitative ratio, so that one increases as the other decreases. One should expect that the phenomena of motion, for whose explanation they were assumed, and the phenomena of their inequality, be precisely the result of them. But one need only take a look at the account of the phenomena based on the opposition of these forces. Any will do, for instance, the uneven speed of a planet in its orbit around its central body, to become immediately aware of the confusion that reigns in it, and the impossibility of sorting out the quantity of the two forces, with the result that the one force, which in the explanation is assumed to be the decreasing, must always be taken just as well as increasing, and vice versa. This is a point which, to be made obvious, would need a lengthier exposition than can be given here, but the minimum necessary will be addressed later in connection with the inverse ratio. And that is going to bring us to the end. I thought we had a few more pages, but I guess we are done. That's the end of part 2 of Being for Itself, and hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. This can be a hard one to wrap your mind around. I understand that I have some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. Again, I don't think that I stepped on too many toes in this one, right? I didn't have a whole lot to add because it was really just the end of the other part where we had explained a good bit of it. But this was more about keeping yourself separate from the others and understanding that you are at the same time like others. And so you are differentiated by the various quality or qualitative features of yourself, right? Your melanin levels, your genitalia, your hair color, your eye color. All of these things distinguish you, as opposed to someone else. But you have similarities to them too. People are born, for the most part, with 10 fingers and 10 toes. That is a commonality, an attractive force. This was a good thought exercise, and hopefully it wasn't too confusing. If you like what I'm doing, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment, whether you agree or disagree with anything that was said here. If you make a comment and it stays respectful, it gets to remain up. If there's another work you would like to see me read or discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks or even a membership. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.